Should we just move closer in?
Yeah, let's tighten the ranks. Welcome, everyone. It's 6 o'clock on Monday night. You're listening to the 73rd installment of the Age Out Angels Radio Hour on www.hamiltonradio.net, Channel 2. I'm your host, Greg Rapport. I'm the founder and executive director of Age Out Angels. We're a 501c3 nonprofit corporation. Age Out Angels provides one-to-one mentors to vulnerable youth for the purpose of coordinating the care and services that they need to survive. We try to help young people avoid some of the horrible pitfalls that they're likely to face if they don't have a proper safety net. This program is brought to you every week at the same time, courtesy of Doc G, William Saunders, Ruben Rodriguez, and all the fine people here at Hamilton Radio who allow us to use this airtime. Doc G is on the big board tonight. This is our second show without our producer, Robin. So once again, chaos could ensue as the hour wears on. Thank you so much at home for tuning in. We miss you, Robin. We've put together what I hope you will find to be an insightful and compelling view of the child welfare system. So get ready, because tonight on the radio hour, this is pretty serious stuff here. My guests are Elise Pivnik, Senior Director of Environmental Health at ISLES, and Peter Rose, Managing Director of ISLES Community Enterprises. Now, for those of you who are outside of Trenton, ISLES is a pretty well-developed, multifaceted nonprofit. They offer many programs for youth in the area, and they have a strong history of bringing value to the community as a whole. And tonight, they're here specifically to talk about the presence of lead in the environment and its effect on the population. So please, find us on Facebook. Now, here's the part that gets a little bit tricky, because if you're watching this in December at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, don't watch. Go away. This is just an archival copy. This show is actually scheduled to air on Monday, February 18th. If you're watching this in February, hit that share button right away. We need you out there to share this. Find us on Facebook. Go to my name, Greg Rapport, hit that share button or email your address book and tell everyone to go to hamiltonradio.net, Channel 2. Tell the world what we're doing here. This is a topic that has made it to the national discourse, I guess primarily because of the atrocity that's been heaped on the residents of Flint, Michigan. But when you think about the aging water delivery infrastructure everywhere, wherever you live, it's no different. You have to wonder if the rest of us can be very far behind. Plus, the issue goes way beyond lead pipes. So this is something that deserves to be shared with the whole world. I hope my friends in Sweden are listening tonight. Share it with everybody. Don't keep this private. We need you. And while you're doing that, let me remind you that we're on every Monday from 6 to 7 with the Age Out Angels Radio Hour, and we have a great lineup of guests coming up. Next week, February 25th, my guests are representatives from the Henry J. Austin Health Center, which is pretty much the mothership of health centers for the population in Trenton. So we'll be able to give you insight into how healthcare is delivered in the urban environment. So be sure to tune in every Monday at 6 p.m. for our unfiltered look at the child welfare system. This is where you come to get the whole truth. And I promise you that what you will hear tonight, you will not hear on the nightly news. It's just not going to happen. Sadly, you can't call in tonight. But the cool thing about pre-recorded shows is that we'll all be watching this together at the same time on February 18th. I'll be watching it. Doc G will be watching it. My guests will be watching it. So if you want to go to Facebook and write a question or comment into the comments field, we'll be able to answer you in real time. So even though you can't call in, you can communicate. And I'll be looking forward to doing that with you. All right, so let's say hi to my guests, Elise Pivnik and Peter Rose. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I appreciate it so much. I just met you guys like a week or so ago, and I had to have you on as quickly as possible. And I hope you're not too embarrassed, because the show is airing in February, and the Christmas decorations are still up behind us.
We're fine. We're happy to share this information.
We're like the bad neighbors, you know.
Weird time travel you guys do here.
Who never. This is it's funny you brought that up. Yeah. This is actually as close to time travel as I can actually fathom.
I think we're there.
You know, in my small brain. So when we met, I didn't actually realize that ISLES was a part of this whole lead, what do you want to call it, issue. And at least some of the stats that you had really blew me away. Can you share some of those with us?
Sure. So I think the important message to start with is that lead is not an issue that is only a problem of Flint, Michigan. And it's also not a problem only of drinking water. So if there's one really strong takeaway from today is to know that you can be a child or an adult, can be harmed by hazardous lead in their homes, so through old lead paint, and that turns into dust in a house. It might not be visible to you. You might have cracked paint along your windows, friction surfaces of a door or a window, which is creating dust and being available to a child to crawl through, and maybe a child then puts their hands in their mouth and can begin the process of being lead poisoned. Lead can also be found in soil, and some of our older cities have an industrial legacy, so that there is lead that blows around a city and may land in a yard or a park. So soil is something to look at. Old lead, the dust in your house, and then, of course, the water. Water is a problem, but it's not the only problem. So one of the things that we did at Isles after the information from Flint reached the national news is we took a look at the data for New Jersey, because we've been studying it for a long time. We've been working on this for a long time. And we found that 13 communities, 13 jurisdictions in New Jersey had a higher incidence of children being contaminated with lead in 2015 than Flint, Michigan. And that was a big surprise to all of us. And it was a big surprise to a lot of people throughout the country. And we were really trying to make the point that this is not a problem that just faces Flint, Michigan.
And I noticed also that we're doing a lot more lead testing of our children, like at the Trenton Back to School fair. There are whole booths there.
So a very important thing to know is that New Jersey is also ahead of the class in some areas. This is a nationwide problem, and New Jersey has done some very significant things, which is, first of all, we have a universal screening mandate here. All children ages 12 months and 24 months are supposed to be getting a lead screening from their pediatrician. And folks out there who are listening and your child has not had one, go ask your pediatrician for that screening. If you're on Medicaid, we know that Medicaid pays for that screening. We also are ahead of the class in that we are a state that uses a benchmark similar to the CDC, which triggers public health intervention. And that is also very important because a lot of other states have a much higher threshold for intervention. And so that is a good thing about New Jersey. But we haven't solved the problem, and so that's why Peter and I continue to work on this.
Okay, we'll take the little victories. New Jersey is one of the leaders. Take that, San Francisco. It's an inside joke from another show.
Okay.
But it's nice to know that at least we're in a leadership position here. Peter, what made Isles get involved in this? I mean, you certainly deal with a lot of issues, and what made you choose this one?
Well, I think Isles has been working on this since we started in 1985 or whatever, doing work in gardens and finding out we can't do urban gardening until we deal with the lead that's in the soil.
Man.
And so I think that was a surprise, and that was the first surprise. And then how do you deal with that? We learned a lot about that. And then, a few years later, I think Elise was working on a project to look at the environmental health and environmental assessment of Trenton, and started seeing substandard housing and lead started becoming an issue, and we didn't know anything about it. And over the years, learning more and more and more about how it affected children and learning and criminal justice and all those other issues, it became one of those bedrock issues that we thought if we solve this, we start fixing several other problems at once. And so if you have 4,000 children a year, new cases of lead poisoning each year in New Jersey, that's a lot of children that are affected, and those effects go out through society. We know that about half of the students in Trenton schools have a lead level that affects their behavior and learning. And if you take that out to the other older cities in the state, and you look at the difficulties they're having with learning in school, with criminal justice, because lead affects your ability to control your impulses. And it breaks parts of your brain that allows for that. Kind of like kind of like brain damage from head trauma from football or from falling off of a motorbike or something. And that limits children's ability to then stay in the game, to be able to learn and sit still and behave properly, and it's not their fault. And so then those issues start filtering down through everything else that we do. And so until we work on these causal issues, we really are kind of wasting some of our time on some of the other issues.
The others would be Band-Aids.
Yeah, they
by
feel like just dealing
comparison.
with the symptoms instead of the causes.
Right.
You know, and in the education system, you hear a lot about, oh, if we just had better teacher training, or those teachers are lazy, or this is the problem with the education system. And no one is looking upstream to what these, really basic origin problems are. We don't think you're doing the most you can to help advance education for children.
Absolutely. We deal with a lot of different types of problems here, and we're always looking for solutions. And it seems like whatever category of problem we deal with, it's just been kicked down the road for so many years that it almost appears to be insurmountable. So let me ask either one of you who wants to answer this question: how the heck did we get here? What started this?
Well, do you have a good answer?
I'll start with.
Go ahead, you start, and I'll finish it off.
Lead was added to paint and to gasoline. First to paint in the early 1900s. We thought at the time, some people thought what we know is it made the paint more smoother to apply. It also was more long lasting.
It's great.
And so, that was considered the premium paint. We knew, the science showed us that there were problems with lead paint, but in the U.S., the paint companies and others really kept that quiet. It's kind of similar to the tobacco situation.
Really?
In Europe, they took the lead out of paint a lot earlier.
They
So
squashed the data.
Yeah, so
They always do.
we had lead in paint. And then we added lead to gasoline for similar reasons. It was a more smooth running, the gas ran more smoothly through the engine, et cetera. And so we had these two huge dumps of lead into the environment through our house paint and other paint, and also through our gasoline, which spewed it into the air to settle into our soil. So that's the beginning of what we consider the lead poisoning problem in our cities. And of course, you can go back to Roman times and start looking at when they were using lead there. There's a lot of historians that agree that probably part of the fall of the Roman Empire is that the leaders were addled by lead because they had it in their water pipes and in their goblets that they drank wine from and the like.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm sort of surprised that we didn't all get it more, years ago. Certainly, if you can recall gasoline stations with lead, I'm assuming you're not old enough, but I know I am.
You're kind.
But it had a smell. I mean, there was
I
an
loved that
odor.
smell.
Yes, it was almost like the smell of sulfur on a matchbook, right? It was there. I mean, it was prevalent. I'm sorry, Peter, go.
No, but here's the. I mean, certainly the issue in gasoline is a problem, and it's been millions of tons of lead have been put in the atmosphere and into our system because of it. But the lead in homes, it wasn't unsafe until it started becoming deteriorated. So if you have a nicely painted surface with lead paint, and it's not rubbing up against anything, it's fine. I mean, it's perfectly
Like
safe.
asbestos, huh?
Kind of like
Yeah, a little bit.
asbestos.
If it's intact.
If it's
Right.
intact, it's not friable. It's fine. So, but once you get older houses, and 90+% of Trenton housing was built before 1980, and some gigantic amount before 1940. So that's older housing, substandard housing. We think about 10,000 units in Trenton are substandard. So now that paint's chipping, it's alligatoring, it's old, it hasn't been repaired, and that's getting into the environment. And children. We often think about kids eating paint chips, which does happen, but a lot of it's just they get it on their hands because the dust is near where their toys are. And then their hands go in their mouth because that's what kids do, or it gets in their food, or it gets on things, but it's getting into their system without them doing anything about it. And no one knows about it. It doesn't smell like anything. It doesn't taste like anything. Well, it does taste a little
It
sweet.
tastes sweet, which is
So it's
insidious.
durable and it tastes good.
That's
huh?
why they
Right.
added it to
Oh,
the
my.
wine. Yeah, they added it to Roman wine because it tasted
They
good.
did really?
Yeah, it's just
Oh, you're kidding.
horrendous. Yeah.
Oh my God. So that just threw me right off my game when you
It's
said
been
that.
around for a long time.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't recommend it. I think a good Cabernet is fine with that.
It's an aged lead. I mean, you have to go that route as well. I just want to take 1 second and talk to some of the people out there who maybe don't live in an urban environment, because you're subject, to this as well. Remember, that like great farmhouse you always wanted,
Exactly.
right?
Well, I have it. Yeah.
Go.
I was just going to say a really important message to people out who are listening today or viewing this. This is not a problem that is unique to cities. It's not just those people over there in the city who have this problem, and we here, perhaps in the suburbs or rural areas, don't. We had someone who worked for us for a while who came to us. She had her ideal farmhouse that she got in rural Ohio and used a heat gun to remove all the lead off the stairs because she was a do-it-yourself person, and her child was terribly poisoned. And so don't anyone think that you are safe simply because you have a certain address. You have to look at the age of your house, and you have to look at the condition of your house. And, if I was buying a house tomorrow, I would be testing that home to make sure that there's no hazardous lead, even though I don't think I see something.
So you really do have to have someone like a professional come in and test the house? Is that how it works?
Well, it depends on what's happening. It depends on the age of the house. If it's built after 78, it's probably considered lead safe or even lead free. If you have if I were buying a new house and it was pre-78, I would be testing windows and doors for that. You can do that. There's a swab that you can buy at Home Depot to test that to see if there's lead present there. If I had young children, I was moving into a house that was going to need a lot of rehab, we're going to throw a lot of dust around, I would probably have a deeper lead risk assessment done by a lead risk assessor, or do a lead paint assessment by a third party if I'm going to do a lot of work. And if I'm then getting work done and there's lead there, I want to make sure it's done in a lead safe way. There are lead safe practices. Contractors have a training that they're required to get to do that. There's a way of doing it, and then once you're done, you test to see if you've stirred up too much of that lead paint to make sure there's no dust left over that has lead in it, and it's all very doable.
And if your house tests positive in a big way, then you have to have all that removed, but you have to have it removed by professional in a hazmat suit.
No.
I mean, that's what we had to do with asbestos, I remember.
Well, I mean, so if you bought a house, or if I bought a house, and we decided we found lead paint in windows and friction surfaces, which is how the paint kind of turns into dust,
Friction,
right?
yeah.
You could fix it yourself, and you could either take that surface down to bare wood, and you can use a heat gun at a certain temperature. After a certain temperature, it lets the lead get out.
Oh.
But at a low temperature, you can just strip the paint off, or use a stripper, and then you throw that away, and it's fine. If it's a larger job, if you're replacing windows, or you can replace all the components. That's called abatement when you're replacing the components. But you could encapsulate some of those surfaces. If you have a baseboard that has lead paint on it, you could just encapsulate it with a special paint that's made for that. It will keep the lead underneath there. You have to make sure that's maintained, because anytime you nick it, then it may let that paint out of there. But you can do something less than just ripping everything out, which is kind of how we got here, kind of following on what Elise was saying is, we knew about this in the 60s and 70s. Sesame Street used to do things on lead on Sesame Street. And then they stopped. And the reason they stopped was the guidelines for abating homes and for taking that out made it so that it was too expensive to do. It was a cost issue, which is how we stop a lot of public health things.
Right.
It was very expensive because it was taking everything out. So if you had a baseboard with lead paint on it, you had to take that out. If you had a window with lead paint on it, you had to remove it. That becomes very expensive. And the new guidelines now allow for enclosing that, encapsulating that, stripping it in a certain way, making it lead safe rather than lead free. And that's brought the cost down to a way that a number that everyone can afford. And we have a program to do that for low-income families and landlords. And our average cost is about $8,500 to do really full lead and also healthy homes work, where we can take care of mold and moisture issues and like that. So it's a very doable number. It's not 30 or 40 or 50,000 like it used to be.
Well, you scared the heck out of me the other day, I have to tell you.
Good.
You did it, and you did it with a package of Sweet and Low.
Yeah.
I never thought of sweet and low as a weapon.
You haven't read the science on it. That's what
It's a very significant, powerful image indeed.
Yeah, so
So-
tell everyone what that was all about.
Well, it's one of those things. I don't know who came up with it, but it's kind of brilliant. And sweet and low isn't quite as
Granular.
Yeah, as regular sugar. It's very
Powdery.
smooth and powdery. And so, if you a packet of sweet and low is about 1 gram, and if that were lead paint dust, that would create enough lead paint dust in 100 10 by 10 rooms, enough to poison a child. And that is a lot of rooms for a small amount. And if you spread it out, we usually do a demonstration where we spread it on a small carpet. And if you throw that sweet and low, even if kind of concentrate on a small carpet, you cannot see it. Right? So again, it's one of those issues. It's hidden, it's secret, it doesn't smell or taste like anything in general. And so it's just an invisible issue it's damaging children and really damaging society because it's very costly. Every child, whether it's kind of morally or personally, but also to our society, it's very costly.
I'm still locked into how 13 cities in New Jersey have children with higher
Yeah.
concentrations of lead poisoning than Flint, Michigan.
We have a very old housing stock and old water infrastructure. We have an industrial legacy here. That's what the number showed.
Yeah. All right, so we talk about how it damages child development, right? Could you be more specific about that? What actually happens in child development when they're lead poisoning?
Well, so it affects your ability to learn. Let me just start with that. And I want some key examples are that it affects your long-term memory, your short-term memory. You are learning your multiplication tables on Monday,
Right.
and you have learned them, and you wake up on Tuesday, and it's not there. You just cannot remember. You're trying to learn to read, and lead affects your auditory processing such that you cannot hear the difference between S as in Sam and F as in Frank. So think about what that means for a child who's trying to learn and feels like a failure. No surprise, that means it often translates into a disruptive child in the classroom and what that means for other children in the classroom who can't learn because of that disruptive child. And just multiply that by 10 and think about what that's like to be a teacher in that classroom or a student in that classroom. We know that it affects our ability to sit still. You know, that everyone wants their children to sit still in school, right? So, but you can't control your behavior. You have this lack of impulse control, so you can't sit still. And then to sum it all up, there's kind of the clarion image of a child sitting on the floor with her head between her knees, and the caption is trying to learn, can't learn no matter how hard they try. So it is really insidious. And I work with a neuroscientist, Dr. Jay Schneider, who's at Thomas Jefferson in Philadelphia. And he said if he was running a school system, he would have there would be the special education department, but there would also be the department of children who have been poisoned by lead, because typical special education prescriptions like extra time on a test, etc., are not going to help a lead-poisoned child. You have a brain that's been damaged. And one of the things we've been working on is trying to get some research money actually to test some interventions which are very promising that make use of what we know about the neuroplasticity of the brain at an early age. Anybody out there listening to us, give a write-in, please, and you can help fund that project.
Where would they write in to fund that project?
Well, they could contact us at Isles, and we're putting together a proposal on that. So, it would not be us. We'd be working with neuroscientists and educators on that. But we're very interested in pursuing that.
So are you telling me there's no vaccine? No pill? Come on, there's a pill for everything, isn't there?
No, there's not.
There's no way to reverse this process, or
So some things we know is that early in getting a child enrolled in high quality child care and early intervention education like Head Start or others, which give a very structured environment for a child, is is known to mitigate some impacts of lead. It's used for all developmental disabilities, a high-quality education program. And so one of the things actually that we've been working on at ISLES is trying to close the gap between what we know about lead in the health department, where they record the lead levels, and then what happens to the child afterward.
Right.
And we believe that there's a, kind of an innocent firewall between what we know about lead in health and what's happening in the education system. So we're trying to build a bridge which would find a way to get these children auto-enrolled in some early education interventions, and to make sure that their educators know their history. One of the things that makes me sad is to think about a child in class who's been lead burdened, can't sit still, can't learn, and the teacher's looking at them like they come from a terrible family, or that they're a terrible child, that they didn't have good parenting, when in fact that's a lead burdened brain in that child and they can't help themselves.
So you're talking about a special needs circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
It's just
Right.
one that's man-made,
Yes.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, most special needs circumstances are not, they're organic in some form
Mm-hmm.
or another.
Exactly.
But this is a special needs circumstance that we've actually managed to create. And what's the prevalence of this in the Trenton school system?
Well, so we have data which shows, I think, that at least probably over 50% of the children in school, all 13 grades right now, have enough lead in their brain that could be affecting their ability to learn.
Oh goodness! I mean,
And that we're
about
talking very
thousands
low
of
levels.
kids.
We're talking low levels. And the CDC has a benchmark for public health intervention. But in the same paragraph, they say there is no safe level of lead. So we know that there are subtle things that are happening to the brain, even if it's not at that benchmark for public health intervention.
Right.
And
So
that's
do I have lead in me? And for my wife, that might explain a lot.
chances are we all had some lead in our system. And maybe we all came from a pretty highly structured family that had enrichment for us and the like, and those kinds of interventions in themselves could have made the difference. So we kind of joke around. We could, maybe our IQ points would be, 10 points higher. Who knows? I don't know.
Right, but we do know that when they took lead out of gasoline, that IQs started to go up. I can't remember
That's true.
like 10 points or
And
something.
from lead paint, same
and
time.
from lead paint, and,
Yeah.
and also
Really?
that the violent crime started dropping. There was a famous book that talked about broken windows, and I don't remember the author, but it would talk about that was how they dropped crime in New York. But really, when people actually looked at the data, they found that the violent crime dropped at the same rate that the lead was leaving the environment. And this woman who did this first study, she looked at the United States. She thought, well, that's kind of interesting. The graphs work in the same direction. She looked in Europe when they took theirs out, and it worked in the same way. So violent crime started dropping as lead came out of the environment. And it's just because it affects that part of your brain, as Elise was saying. When you look at the pictures, and we've done webinars on this, and had pictures of the neurons, and you can see a nice healthy neuron and then a damaged one, just like getting hit in the head with a hammer or having a stroke or something. And so that is a real internal thing. You can't see it. As a teacher, you couldn't see that. But it would be really good to know, if you were a teacher, that child isn't doing that on purpose, and that maybe they needed some other interventions. And so one of the things we're trying to do is break down that firewall so that educators can know. And one of the things Elise has suggested in the state is that when you go to school, when you start school, you would present your lead test just like you do your immunization record, and then that number could be shared if it was over 2.5 micrograms per deciliter, which is kind of the number, although there's no safe level. That's the number we start seeing changes on testing and other things. That the school would start to know that, the educators would start to know that, and interventions would be started for those children. At the same time, we're working and trying to find what might work better, because we don't have perfect science on it. But we know lots of folks are working on dealing with damaged brains and how to work around those neural deficits.
Well, I mean, in Trenton, if you're saying that 50%, you're talking about 7,000, 7,500 young people. And Peter, did I understand you correctly that when you enroll in school, you do have to present an immunization record?
You
I'm
do.
Right.
sure,
And
but you don't have.
Correct.
Don't?
There's
No.
a space on the form to add a lead level, but it's not required. And so we've been working towards finding a way to make that mandatory.
That's
and
brutal.
it should be, it's obviously private information that should be kept by the school nurse, but it should be available if a child is struggling. And really, the important thing is we want to intervene before they get to kindergarten. There's those early years where special education and enriched preschool environment and enhanced parenting skills, et cetera, can make a difference. So we're really trying to work in that space. And I'm just going to add one study here that I think is compelling, and it was done years ago by someone who we refer to as kind of the father of lead poisoning prevention, Howard Needleman, and he did a study of young men in prison in Allegheny County outside of Pittsburgh, and he showed that the young man in prison had disproportionately higher levels of lead in their system compared to the control group that never went to prison, and it's compelling.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So, are you hopeful that that's actually going to get changed? And the reason I keep harping on this is because it's always been my thought for like 100 years that the worst thing a parent can ever do is have a special needs child and not tell anyone. And they do it for a couple of reasons. Like, first, they don't want the kid to have the stigma. And I understand that. And the second thing is, I think parents with special needs children are always hopeful that this will be the day it all changes, right? That I'll send him to sleepaway camp, and it'll just magically he'll be fixed.
Yeah.
And of course, he's never slept away from home before, and that just makes it worse, right?
Sure.
And so the worst thing you can do is for the child or the teacher or caregiver, is to put a child in that situation where the caregiver's uninformed.
No, I totally agree. And, I think at IELTS, we always take the position it is better to know than not know. Sometimes we get feedback, well, why bother testing a house? There isn't enough money to fix them, although now we do have a program that can fix some. The point is, it's better to know because there are things that you can do. If a baby's crib is underneath some chipping paint from a ceiling, you can move the crib. That's low cost, right? So it's better to know, and I've known families who had a lead-burdened child, and I saw the enrichment that they got and the services they got for that child, and that child graduated high school and is doing pretty well. So there are things you can do with that knowledge to make sure your child is getting the best services, the best enrichment. And of course, we want more research, which I referred to before.
Yeah.
And along the same lines, I mean, we're also trying to push that we actually know where lead is in homes. Whether if you rent a house, if you rent an apartment, you should know if there's lead there or not, and there shouldn't be.
Right.
And so we've been working on a bill to do that. There's a little loophole in New Jersey that 1- and 2-bedroom apartments don't ever get tested for lead, and you could put in any family in there, multiple families, which happens all the time, get poisoned, they move out, the next family moves in, they get poisoned. So we've been working on some legislation to change that and put that into the inspection of just like other units are inspected, multifamily units are inspected. Just like we're working on the other one for the bill for students. And it's important to know what's going on. It's important to give the information to the families. And also now we have money in New Jersey to be able to work on those units if low-income families are living there for free. And we can put up to $12,000 worth of fixes into those buildings.
Fantastic.
There's another big loophole that we're working on. So folks may have heard about the Section 8 housing program where you can, HUD gives a subsidy to the landlord to enable a low-income family to rent in a community. Right now, we have such a mixed-up system where too many people are overseeing that program. So there's local involvement, there's state involvement, and there's federal involvement. But you can become a Section 8 landlord and never have had your home inspected for lead. And we know from some of our local public health department staff that they have children in their system who are in their caseload now for lead poisoning who come from Section 8 housing. And we feel like that's a huge gap that can be closed.
Yeah, don't forget the county housing authority. And
Yes,
all that too,
and
right?
Section
And
8.
each one's
It's not.
different.
It's not just city. No, it is a nationwide problem. By the way, we're trying to work nationwide on this, statewide and locally.
The irony is that those are HUD housing vouchers, and HUD is the agency responsible for the guidelines for fixing paint. and lead hazard control.
Uh-huh.
And they don't require testing of lead in homes that they're renting to their vouchers. So
I mean, I've bought and sold houses. Why everybody makes you test for radon?
It's
You don't have to
exactly the
test for
model.
lead, do you?
It's exactly
know?
the same model we're pushing for.
Yeah.
You need to have a certificate at the time of sale. You need to share the information with the buyer that says either lead is there or not. You have to do a test to share that information. It doesn't kill the home sale, but you have to disclose.
Yeah.
And right now, landlords and sellers can hide behind a box on that particular form that says, I don't know. And we're trying to change that. So all sellers will have to disclose at the time of sale whether there's hazardous lead in the house. At the same time, a landlord not only has to know if there's lead, but has to show that they've corrected it at the time of entering into a lease with the tenant.
How about that? So, how is this something that has an effect on the general life expectancy of the population of an area? Is there a corollary to that?
I haven't seen data on
I
that.
I don't know about data. I mean, certainly if the lead level is high enough, it affects your health. Certainly, if you're not able to work up to your potential and have if you live in poverty, we know that people who live in poverty have much lower life expectancy. Marty had a number the other day. I don't know if it was 12 years or something versus if you lived in Trenton versus Princeton, just because of the stresses, the environmental stresses, and everything else. So it doesn't affect you directly, like it's not breaking you down, but it's all these ancillary problems that it's causing.
But there is also adult impacts. We know it affects, it's implicated in kidney disease. We know it's implicated in cardiovascular disease. So I've never seen a study which adjusts for just lead only and what its impact is on longevity. But there are health effects in adulthood for sure.
Okay. So, all right. So let's try to shift it to a positive note
you're
here
gonna
for
have
a
a
minute.
positive?
If
You don't like our
such a
doom
thing
and
is
gloom here?
Possible. Yeah. Let's. I mean, there's a Christmas tree behind us for for crying out loud. What's the next step now? What are we going to do moving forward? Is it just working on the legislation? Is that what comes up? A good friend of mine once said there's two ways mountains move: laws and lawsuits.
Well, so we are certainly working on the legal end. We think that is very important. We are also on a mission to have everybody understand that lead in healthy homes has an impact on their health and they should pay attention to it. And we want that information to become part of a demand system that says, no, we're not settling for bad housing. There's a housing code in the city of Trenton. There's a housing code in Newark. Why aren't our houses up to code? And we want that to be part of everybody's understanding about what an feature of good health is. So we're talking about communication. We're talking about legislation. We're talking about better and better home repair programs that we are working on.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good news. I think a lot of things are moving in the state. I think for a while the Department of Health was ignoring or being told to ignore the problem. And I think now there's a realization it's a real issue, and if we solve it, it's going to save the state money. It's a moral issue to me too, that we know this is happening and not fixing it. I think the advocacy on legislation we're working on is going to make a huge difference. We have money now to do it. We know we have the technology, so to speak, to fix it. And we have agencies like ISLES that can do it. I mean, we've done about 100 lead hazard control jobs over the last 2 years. And we've done that, like I said, for less than $9,000 per unit. Some of those are replacing 20 windows at a time or, doing roofing.
Whoa.
Doing
that's fast. 100 in 2 years is like one
We're
a
fast.
week.
That we are really good at it.
Yeah, we have some excellent staff who've been trained and have done we've been working on kind of making our model the best we can over years. We piloted something a few years back, been working on that, and now when they gave us money, we hit the ground running. Like day one, we were ready to go. And so there's a lot of good news, and we can give that information away to other agencies and give them the technical assistance to do that. So I think there's a lot of good news. I think the more knowledge that we have is better. I think we're educating the public more about it. We've done over 850 home tests over the last 2 years in Trenton for lead, paint, water, and soil, and also healthy homes assessments. And so those families are getting the information, and a lot of those have turned into the work that we're doing to remove lead when we find it. About half of those homes we found lead that was in a condition that needed to be fixed. And then we've done water testing too, and I think we've only found, actually water in Trenton is in pretty good shape, actually.
We were getting odd. I have to tell you, when I
yeah.
just moved from Lawrenceville to Columbus, and in Columbus, water costs a fortune. It's for some reason, I don't know why, it's the American Water Company or something.
yeah.
If you don't like it, buy their stock and make your money that way. But but water costs a fortune in Columbus. Water did not cost as much in Lawrenceville. But we were constantly getting letters that said, oops, there might be lead.
Yeah, right.
In the
They've
water.
they've had some problems recently. I think they're working on it. I think the new administration has brought in some, very skilled professionals, and they're working to turn around the problems that they have. But indeed, we're very familiar with that. One area I just wanted to add that we are working on, and why I'm hopeful, is that, we can make our existing services delivered in a more efficient way. And one thing that we've been working on is that we have a whole army throughout the state of what we call home visitors for maternal child welfare. And there are, programs like Parents as Teachers and Nurse Family Partnership. And they go to a family with a young child who might be considered in a vulnerable setting. And they are visiting a home on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And we could be making use of that army, and I call it an army because there's a lot of them, to do a walkthrough of a house and do a healthy homes assessment and work with the family and say, this is what let's be talking about this first thing, and we're looking for ways to get a healthy home inspection before a family brings home a newborn. Let's check out that house before a child can be poisoned. And we have ways to do that. Isles is in a position, we have a training center. We can train these people really for free because of grant money that we have. And we're trying to bring that group of family educators into the system. And it's a relatively low-cost addition, we think, because these people are already going out to the homes.
Yeah. And we talk about lead a lot, but healthy homes is part of that mix because they work together. And I think, asthma is a very expensive thing, and there are a lot of folks with asthma. In Trenton, I think Trenton has 72 or 76% of all asthma cases in Mercer County because of the housing condition. And some of those issues can be fixed by this healthy homes interventions that we can do. Some of it's just from the chemicals that people use in their homes, or air fresheners, or dust, or other things that if they had the education and maybe some components, maybe we'd help them create a cleaning product that isn't, instead of using Fabuloso, maybe you could use something with essential oils in it and vinegar that wouldn't create an asthma condition for your child or other people in your family. So there are interventions, and like Elise says, we have this army of folks who are going into homes anyway.
Yeah.
What if they had a little more information and could work on a broader basis and again, working at root causes rather than just symptoms of issues?
And that army is going to grow. I mean, in October of 2019, when the Family First Prevention Act kicks in, there are going to be a lot more. They're diverting billions of dollars from that they used to give to group homes for kids, right? To try to do preventive measures and what that basically means is assist families to be able to have their children in an environment that is a little bit less threatening.
So we want to train those people in lead and healthy homes. We've got a training center.
Yeah, because housing is, again, it's one thing. I mean, whatever the stat is, kids spend 70% of their time in the home, and seniors spend 90% of the time in the home. And if that home's substandard, that's causing a lot of issues. We talk about housing as a vaccine, that you can really inoculate families from a lot of health issues if you deal with the home health conditions and those indoor air conditions.
Before we go further, I do have to take one moment and thank all the people who made donations to Age Out Angels this week.
Oh,
and
nice.
let me thank all the people who made them to Isles as well.
Well, thank you. Yes,
while
thank
we're
you.
here. Now, since this is December and you're reading this in February, I don't know who you are yet, but know that I love you. And as soon as I get back live on the air in March, I promise I will say thank you to each and every one of you individually. And if you have an employee giving fund or matching gifts foundation associated with your place of work, we would certainly appreciate your contacting us and telling us how we can participate in that. Private message me on Facebook or email to greg@ageoutangels.org. And I want to remind everyone that you can donate to Age Out Angels every time you make a purchase from Amazon. All you have to do is designate Age Out Angels to be your Amazon Smile designee, and a portion of your payment will go to us without costing you one penny more. Are you guys on Amazon Smile as well?
Yes.
Okay, so we could share. It's all right. You're buying a lot of stuff.
I am. Tons of stuff.
Right? So it's okay to share a little bit. I can make it easy for you to designate Age Out Angels as your Amazon Smile recipient. All you have to do is contact me either via Facebook or directly at greg@ageoutangels.org, and I can send you a link that will take you directly to our designation.
I bought 3 things while we were talking.
Put that smartphone away.
Multitasking.
Elise,
Yeah, I
just
could do it.
Are you a scientist? Is that just we usually do the bona fides first.
Yes, I'm a citizen scientist, but my background is in city planning. And I've been working in the community development field and in the housing field for some time. My first work was in the city of Philadelphia years ago, and really I became interested in this when we were cleaning up something called brownfields in Trenton, which is abandoned, contaminated land, typically left over from our industrial past. And I came to see through a series of research. Some activities of research that really the most dangerous place to live in Trenton and in many cities is your house. And actually that goes across. It's not just in urban areas. We have a lot of chemicals. There's a lot of things we apply in our houses that are emitted in our houses. And that's what led me into the environmental health field. And I realized that especially in Trenton in the urban setting that there was no connection being made between health and housing. And we were talking a lot about industrial contaminants, but we weren't talking about what was going on in our own housing. And I've been on a mission ever since.
You are so passionate about it. It's wonderful. When I heard you speak, I knew I wanted you to come.
Oh,
She's
Come
the
on
best.
this radio program.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it?
Yep.
Elise Pivnik, Senior Director of Environmental Health at Isles, and Peter Rose, Managing Director of Isles Community Enterprises. When you look for Isles on the web, since this is all radio and everything, let me just spell it for you. It's ISLES, not the conventional spelling of Isles. ISLES.org.
right.
Isles.org. Thank you so much. It's wonderful having you both on the show. We're going to take a short break, and I'll be back in a minute with some final thoughts. So there's still time to hit that share button, because what I'm about to say is extremely intelligent. I'm just spoiler alert, okay? Thanks so much
Thank you.
for being on the show.
Thank
guys.
you.
It's
Thank
wonderful.
you.
Loved having you. Oh my. If you could just hang there for And we are back. If you're a regular listener of this show, you must be starting to get a feel for how this situation that we refer to as poverty in general can be created and then snowball to a place where the condition perpetuates generation to generation. You can use numbers to substantiate many different narratives. For example, you could say that we've gotten rid of 90% of the lead that was around before 1978, and therefore we've won. But this is only a portion of a much larger story. You've heard of how laws can be manipulated to drive minorities into deeper and deeper ghetto situations using redlining and other techniques. And once that happens, there's less opportunity to earn. You've learned about how redlining is used to incentivize businesses to leave urban centers and leave residents without commerce, without jobs, without access to nutritious food. Then once you understand the whole context of the situation, which population do you think is most affected by that remaining 10% of the lead that's still floating around the environment? And most people, if you're like me, lots of times you just sit at home and feel helpless. If you're sitting at home right now and listening to this, first of all, thank you, because you're learning about this. And while it was happening, it was all pretty much sold to us as community improvement, and I'm sure lead was sold as, the most important discovery of this century. But if you're wondering what you can do now, If you're wondering what you can do as an individual right now, the answer is to support these nonprofits who are out there trying to fight against a machine that's bigger than all of us. Make your donations to these organizations who are partnering with other organizations and working with state and federal agencies and trying to fix that which is broken. That might mean giving financial donations. It might mean donating your time, or both. But I urge everyone to be a part of the solution. Don't just sit there and feel helpless because the problem feels like it's insurmountable. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, another hour talking about youth who should matter more in our political and economic discourse than they do. And we thank you so much for tuning in and maybe helping spread the word. Again, we offer humble thanks to Hamilton Radio, to my most excellent guests, Elise Pivnik, Senior Director of Environmental Health at ISLES, and Peter Rose, Managing Director of ISLES Community Enterprise. Thanks to our engineer, Doc G. Always a pleasure, sir. Music provided by Kurt Seldenridge, owner-operator of the Cave Rehearsal Recording Space in Pennsylvania. Our webmaster is Carmen Garcia Valera, and our social media specialist is Bailey Braverman. Join me next Monday, February 25th. My guests will be representatives from the Henry J. Austin Health Center, and you will learn all about the healthcare delivery system in the urban environment. It's certainly something worth tuning in and learning about. So until then, let's make this week the best week ever. Have a good evening.